Good day everyone and welcome to this video on the new Battlegrounds, where I want to share some of my first experiences and tips here and there on this new PvP mode. It's the first week that these have been out on the live server. It's also the first time I've been trying them, as I did not play on the PTS, and the experiences that I got doing so is what I want to sum up in this video. I'm sure everybody is already aware of this, but basically they have removed the old Battlegrounds and they have changed it into two-sided Battlegrounds 4v4 and 8v8, and there are some other details and things like power-ups and a competitive mode, but really that's the essence of it. So for starters, I will talk about the competitive 4v4 solo mode in the Battlegrounds. In general, 4v4 I think is more difficult than 8v8, especially because it is the competitive mode, so there is a ladder, a leaderboard there, and that means that there will be more competitive players, better players, more tryhards if you want to call it that, in this mode, which makes it harder for the average player to compete in there as well. What I also noticed for this mode is that as a single player you can have the biggest influence there. In this solo queue, if you go for example as a healer, or if you happen to get a healer on your team, it's going to make a huge difference to whether you can win the mode or not. Or in general, if you are a good player, if you know how to defend yourself, if you know how to kill an enemy very well, you have a bigger impact in that mode than in the other modes of the new Battlegrounds. However, this does go both ways. For example, if you get a bad player on your team, especially for example in a deathmatch, it's going to significantly decrease your chance of winning. Same counts if somebody leaves. I notice this happens every now and then as well, especially if a battleground such as a deathmatch is not going so well in the first round. Some players just immediately leave, and that also has a big impact on your chances to win, of course. On that matter, I also have to say that if you leave, I noticed that there is only a 5-minute penalty afterwards, and then you can go ahead and queue again. I noticed this during various instances of crashing in the Battleground, so they are not that stable yet either. I think they might fix that in the long run, but what's interesting is that I noticed this 5-minute penalty, and I think this is not enough if you want to have any kind of competitive game mode. If you want to call it competitive, you should punish people harder if they do not want to compete in there. What I also noticed in the 4v4 mode is that winning battles, so defeating the enemy teams, is actually what matters the most now, not standing on flags or capturing relics or things like that, like in the previous Battlegrounds. I don't know if that is due to the changes in the game mode, or whether that's due to the players just really looking to defeat the other team, but I'm quite happy to see that. It's one of the things I dislike the most about the previous Battlegrounds, where some players could just build like a tank, capture flags, or capture relics and stand on flags and win that way. It's not PvP, that, but I have not noticed this as much in the new Battlegrounds, and this is a good thing. This is an improvement. As for builds for this game mode, I have made variations on solo builds to keep in account the group that I'm in. Going full solo I noticed doesn't work so well. Maybe it works if you're still in low MMR, but especially if you get into the more competitive MMR, and especially also in the smaller maps like the IC Arena, you really need to keep into account that you're in a group and that you need to play together with that group. But doing that is not too difficult. For example, if I am playing on a Templar, where before I have Race Against Time, I'm going to change that out by Elude to have my more survivability against enemy AoE bursts. I've changed out one of my ultimates to Solar Disturbance, which has an excellent AoE burst and stun synergy to it, and people will usually press that synergy if I place it well on the enemy group, and it can be a real game changer to win a fight, especially if I also combine it with Balork, for example. Another good edit to your build can be going with the Resto ult instead of, for example, Undo. Resto ult is one of the best 4-man group survivability ultimates when the enemy group pushes in. So this is another simple change you can make that keeps into account you're playing with a group, and that can make a big difference. The last thing that I want to mention are things like Radiating Regeneration and Echoing Vigor. These are commonly used in groups as well, but here I really need to consider how tightly my group will play together, because if they don't really do that, then I'm kind of handicapping myself by doing this. But that's kind of the idea I go with for making builds for solo 4-man queue, and also for solo 8-man queue. So many of the points I just mentioned count for that as well. But one big difference is that I noticed that your individual contribution, or the loss from a group member that does not participate well, is less noticeable. So in that sense, in the 8v8 mode, at least in the solo one, you can be a lot more casual than in the 4v4 mode, because your individual contribution matters less. Another minor thing I noticed is that in the 8v8 mode, playing the objective becomes a little bit more important again than always just going and defeating the enemy, because the maps are bigger, and for example in something like Domination, really going to those flags and standing and capturing them is going to make you win the battleground more so than always going for the enemy and defeating them. And then for the second part I want to talk about the group battlegrounds, so starting with group 4 versus 4. I think the ticket to winning in this game mode, in this competitive game mode, is really simple, is that the group that plays the most like a mini battle group will win. While playing, I noticed that essentially the victor is decided before the battleground even starts, because if you have a loosely organized group, like you might use to casually roam around the Citadel, or with the builds that same builds that you use in a solo 4v4 battlegrounds, you will win if you encounter another group like that with worse players. But both of these groups will get absolutely steamrolled by a group that has organized themselves before starting the battleground, the same way like you would organize a ball group in Citadel. And what I mean by that is that you get matching sets, so for example one person has Rallying Cry, another person has a sustain set or Powerful Assault. You match skills and AoE burst skills and healing skills together as well, so you have a dedicated healer for example, or everybody runs Echoing Vigor or Radiating Regeneration, things like that. Also voice comms, so you can move together and you can coordinate bursts together to wipe the enemy group. It's really going to make the difference here in this competitive group 4 versus 4 battlegrounds. Now this kind of gameplay is not so much my cup of tea, so after trying it out a few times with the group as well, I avoided these battlegrounds myself, but I imagine if you're a ball group player in Citadel for example, or you enjoy this kind of coordinated gameplay, which is a big part of ESO PvP as well in the end, you could have a lot of fun trying to compete on the leaderboard against other such groups. And then there's also the group 8v8. I think the difference between the 8v8 and the 4v4 is a bit similar to what I mentioned for the solo queues 8v8 and 4v4, in the sense that the individual contribution will matter a little less, but still if you have a group to go into 8v8 and you coordinate that beforehand, this is what's going to make the difference on whether you will win the battleground or not. Anyway, that's it for my first impressions. What follows now for me is making builds for this kind of content like I just described. I also need to make builds for Citadel and duels, updated for update 44. As soon as that's done, I'll put it on my website as per usual, and in case you want to see the work in progress on that or you want to support this channel, that's all in my Patreon. In any case, I thank you very much for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye!
This can't be! We